The glass on the kitchen counter was still half full when Lena walked in and found the note. Not a long note, not a cruel one either, which somehow made it worse. Just 3 lines in Marcus's handwriting, the same handwriting she had watched. Sign their mortgage papers, their wedding card. The adoption papers for the dog they no longer had because he'd taken Biscuit too. 3 lines that said he needed space. That things had felt flat for a while. That he hoped she understood. She stood there in her coat, grocery bags still in her hands, and read it twice. Then she set the groceries down on the counter, folded the note in half and placed it under the glass. That was the thing nobody would understand later, when she tried to explain it. Not the leaving, the glass, the fact that he had poured himself a drink, made a decision that would end 11 years of her life, and walked out the door without even rinsing it. Lena had met Marcus when she was 24, and working a contract job for a downtown architecture firm in Calgary. He was the kind of man who filled a room not because he was the loudest in it, but because he always seemed to know something you didn't. She had found that attractive then. That quiet confidence, the way he spoke slowly, like every word had already been weighed. She had mistaken carefulness for depth. They married when she was 27. Small ceremony, Banff in October, the aspens already turned gold. She had cried at the reception not out of overwhelming happiness, but out of relief. She had thought, finally something I can count on. She had been building things her whole life. Structures, systems, solutions. She had a gift for looking at empty space and seeing what could exist in it. That gift had earned her a junior partnership at 31, and a growing reputation in sustainable design. She'd consulted on 3 municipal projects across Alberta, spent weekends doing site visits when other people were at brunch, built her name one careful decision at a time. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, she had also been quietly, steadily making herself smaller. It happened the way it always does, not in a single moment, but across hundreds of tiny ones. The work trip she didn't take because Marcus made a comment about how she was never home. The presentation she rewrote 3 times because he'd said it sounded too aggressive. The awards dinner she skipped because he'd called her professional world a bit much. She had told herself she was being a partner, being balanced, being someone who didn't let ambition take over everything. She hadn't noticed that the ambition he wanted her to dial down was also the thing that made her herself. By the time the note appeared on the counter, Lena had not taken a solo professional trip in 2 years. She had missed the conference in Vancouver, where her mentee had presented work they'd developed together. She had turned down a speaking invitation in Toronto because the timing felt complicated. She had kept herself contained in a shape that fit more easily beside Marcus, and Marcus had still found the shape boring. He didn't use that word, but his friend Joel had, apparently, which she found out 3 weeks later when Marcus's coworker Priya texted her by mistake. A forwarded message. Marcus to Joel. She's just very predictable now. Lena used to have this energy and it's just not there anymore. Meeting someone who actually challenges me. Someone. The someone turned out to be a woman named Sabrina. Lena found out the way people always find out. Through the specific geometry of a man who stops hiding things, because he has already decided to leave. Sabrina did social media consulting and had 38,000 followers, and a way of standing in photographs that looked effortless, even though Lena had enough design sense to know that nothing in those photos was accidental. She was 29. She used the word vibe without irony. Lena was 33 and had just been shortlisted for a National Architecture Award that Marcus had never mentioned to a single person they knew. She sat with the shortlist email for a long time the night it arrived. The ceremony was in Toronto. Black tie, the foundation's gala, held every 2 years to recognize emerging voices in Canadian design. Her name was in the category for sustainable public infrastructure. There were 4 other nominees. She had looked them all up. She almost didn't submit the nomination herself. Her colleague Faye had done it without telling her, had filled out the entire application using Lena's portfolio, and presented it to her as a done thing. You would have talked yourself out of it, Faye had said. So I just didn't give you the chance. Lena had laughed. Then she'd gone home to Marcus and mentioned it at dinner, and he had said, and asked if there was more pasta. The gala was in 6 weeks. She was going to decline. She had already drafted the email in her head, the gracious withdrawal, the thanks for the recognition, the I'm not able to attend at this time. She did not send that email. What she did instead was stand in her bathroom one night, looking at her own face in the mirror, and ask herself a question she hadn't asked in years. Who are you when no one needs you to be quieter? She looked tired. She looked like someone who had been making herself comfortable for someone else, so long that comfortable had started to feel like disappearing. She had good bones, her grandmother used to say. She had more than good bones. She had a mind that could look at a problem and find the elegant solution. She had a career that mattered. She had a name that was starting to mean something in rooms she hadn't even entered yet. She had spent 3 years making herself less visible inside her own home, and the man she'd done it for had still left. She called her cousin Renata, who lived in Montreal and had never once in her life been subtle. Renata answered on the second ring and listened without interrupting, which was unusual enough that Lena almost asked if she was unwell. So, Renata said when Lena finished, "You're going to Toronto. I wasn't going to. But now?" A pause. "I think I'm going," Lena said. Renata made a sound like exhaling and celebration at the same time. "Good. Wear something that makes people feel like they failed to notice you for years." The next 6 weeks moved differently than the 6 before them. Something had shifted, not dramatically, not in the way of reinvention montages. She didn't cut her hair or redecorate her apartment, or take up running at 5 a.m. She just started saying yes to the things she had been quietly, reflexively declining. She called back the journalist, who had requested an interview for an architecture magazine. She agreed to the guest lecture at the University of Calgary's design faculty that she'd been deferring for 8 months. She had lunch with Faye and talked for 3 hours about a project concept she hadn't let herself develop, because Marcus had once said it sounded too ambitious to be realistic. She also, for the first time in longer than she could properly account for, spent an evening doing nothing except sitting by her window with a glass of wine, watching the city below, and letting herself think about what she actually wanted. She wanted the award. She wanted the project. She wanted to stop apologizing for being good at things. The man who would eventually be relevant to this story appeared during that period, but not in a way that announced itself as significant. His name was Owen. He was a structural engineer who had consulted on one of her municipal projects 2 years prior and had reappeared now because the city had greenlit the second phase. He was 36, methodical, genuinely funny in a dry way that took a moment to land, and he had a habit of bringing coffee to site visits without being asked to and remembering exactly how each person took it. He had met Marcus once at a Project Rap event and had spent the entire drive home thinking about how the man had interrupted Lena's sentence about load-bearing design 3 times in 4 minutes to say something unrelated. He had not said anything about this observation to anyone. He had simply filed it away and continued working with Lena professionally and treating her ideas with the attention they deserved. He found out about the separation the same way the rest of the professional circle did, through the natural osmosis of shared networks. He sent a brief message. "Heard things have been hard. Hope you're doing all right. Nothing more. No suggestions, no pivot, just acknowledgement." Lena had read it on the bus and found, to her mild surprise, that she had not been able to dismiss it the way she usually dismissed these kinds of messages. The gala was on a Friday in November. She flew to Toronto on Thursday afternoon, stayed at a hotel near the venue, ordered room service, slept better than she had in weeks. In the morning, she walked along the waterfront for an hour before the city fully woke up. There was ice on the edges of things, a particular cold that Toronto did differently than Calgary, and she stood at the water's edge and felt something she hadn't expected to feel: calm. Not numb, not resigned, calm. The specific quietness that comes when you stop bracing. She had bought the dress 3 weeks earlier with Renata on the phone via video call. Renata sitting in her Montreal kitchen with a glass of Rioja, rendering judgment on everything Lena tried. They had landed on deep burgundy, clean lines, something that did not perform anything but simply existed with intention. It fit her the way a good design fits its space, not because it tried to fill everything, but because it understood exactly what it was. She arrived at the venue alone, which was the plan, which had felt like a concession when she made it and felt like a choice by the time she walked through the doors. The room was exactly the kind of room that made people stand a little straighter. High ceilings, long tables with white linens, the low hum of people who had achieved things, talking to other people who had achieved things. She recognized two people immediately. A landscape architect she'd admired for years, and a city planner she'd collaborated with on the River District proposal. She moved toward them and was absorbed into conversation, without effort, the way she used to move through professional spaces. Before she had convinced herself that this kind of ease was something she needed to contain. She did not think about Marcus. Twice he almost surfaced. Something someone said about a new development in Calgary, the accidental brush of a memory near the beginning of a sentence. And both times she let it pass through without stopping. She had practiced this. Not with a therapist, not with a plan, but just by noticing. Letting the thought arrive, refusing to build a room around it, letting it go. The awards portion of the evening came after dinner, a procession of names and citations, the room offering its attention in that specific formal way. Lena's category was fourth. She was sitting between the landscape architect and a woman from Halifax who had done extraordinary work on affordable coastal housing. And when they announced the finalists, she heard her own name and felt her hands go very still in her lap. She did not win. A man from Vancouver won, a 38-year-old, whose work on transit infrastructure she genuinely admired, and she applauded and meant it. But being named was its own thing. Hearing her name in that room, attached to that category, among those people, it landed in a place that Marcus's opinion of her had been occupying for years, and quietly rearranged the furniture. She was a finalist. Her work was here. Her name was being said aloud in a room full of people who understood what it meant. She stepped outside after the ceremony for air, out to a balcony that looked over the city, and stood there for a while without her phone. Owen texted at some point during the evening. She saw it when she went back inside. "Good luck tonight. Whatever happens, you're on that list for a reason." He had sent it before the awards were announced, which meant he had looked up the timing without being asked. She read it twice. She typed back, "Finalist. Didn't win. Standing ovation for the guy who did. It was a good night." He replied within a minute, "That's exactly what a good night looks like. Congratulations." There was something in that response she found herself returning to later. On the flight home, in the window seat, watching the clouds below. Not congratulations for winning, for the right thing. He had understood without needing it explained to him. She had not been understood that casually in a very long time. Marcus reached out in January. She almost hadn't opened the message. His name appeared in her notifications, and she had set the phone face down, and made herself a cup of tea, and thought about whether she wanted to know what it said. Then she decided that not reading it gave it more weight than reading it. It was longer than the note he'd left. A lot longer. He talked about reflection and about having made a mistake, and about how Sabrina had been. He used the word clarifying, and about how he missed the life they'd had. He said she had always been the most impressive person in any room, and he hadn't appreciated that properly. He said he'd heard about the award nomination and felt proud, and then apparently reread that sentence and added, "Even though I know I don't have any right to feel that." Lena read it the way she would read a report on a project that had already closed, with attention, without emotion. She did not respond that day. She sat with it for a week, not because she was undecided, but because she wanted to be certain she was answering from the right place, rather than a reactive one. Then she typed, "I hope you're well, Marcus. I don't have anything to give you. Take care of yourself." She sent it and did not look at the reply. Faye called the next evening. Someone in Calgary's professional network had seen Marcus at an industry event with a woman who was not Sabrina, which meant the Sabrina chapter had apparently also closed. And Faye was reporting this with the tone of someone delivering reconnaissance. "I thought you should hear it from me before someone else made a thing of it," Faye said. "I appreciate that," Lena said, genuinely, "but I don't really need the updates." Faye paused. "Yeah," she said. "That's good. That's a good sign." It was a good sign. The project with Owen went into its full phase in February. They were in the same site meetings again, the same working groups, the same email threads, full of technical specifications, and occasional dry observations about municipal bureaucracy. He brought coffee. She had started to notice the specific way he listened, not waiting for his turn to speak, actually receiving what was being said. One afternoon after a meeting ran long, he asked if she wanted to grab dinner. Not with framing, not with caveat, just the direct question. She said yes. They went to a Vietnamese place in Kensington that he claimed made the best broth in Calgary. And he was right. And they talked for 2 hours about the project, and then about the field, and then about an article she'd read about urban heat mapping, and then somehow about a hiking trail near Canmore that he said was worth doing in spring when the snow started to melt off the peaks. He did not perform interest. He had it. She drove home afterward and sat in her car in the parking garage for a moment, before going in. Not because anything heavy had happened, but because she wanted to hold it for a second. The ease of it. The fact that she had talked for 2 hours and not once monitored herself, adjusted herself, wondered how she was landing. She had just been herself, and that had been enough. More than enough. They took the Canmore Trail in late April. It was still cold at elevation. Patches of hard snow in the shaded places. The kind of day where the light comes sideways through the trees and makes everything look like something worth keeping. He walked beside her, not ahead. He pointed out a pair of eagles near the ridge without making it a whole thing. At one point she was explaining a problem she was working through on the project, and he listened with his whole attention and then said quietly, "I think you already know the answer. You said it in the second sentence." She had looked at him. He was right. She had known the answer since the second sentence. They stopped at the overlook and stood there for a while, without needing to fill it with anything, and she thought about what it meant to be next to someone and feel like more of yourself, not less. The project was named a Regional Design Excellence finalist in June. Her name was on the submission. Her concept was in the documentation. She gave a short speech at the presentation event in Edmonton. 7 minutes, no notes, and when she finished the room held for a moment before the applause started. The way it does when something has actually reached people. Owen was in the second row. He didn't say anything afterward. That wasn't true. He said it was exactly right, and that she'd given them something to think about. Then they went for dinner with the rest of the team, and she ordered dessert because she wanted to. She had stopped tracking what she deserved to take up. Her cousin Renata came to visit in July, and they went to a farmer's market on Saturday morning, and Renata kept looking at Lena sideways in the specific way she did when she was processing something. Finally, near the cheese stall, Renata said, "You look different." "Different how?" "Like you stopped holding your breath." Lena thought about it. "Yeah," she said. "I think that's about right." She had not rebuilt herself from loss. She hadn't woken up one morning and decided to be someone new. She had simply stopped arranging herself around a space that another person had left, and discovered that without that arrangement, she took up exactly the right amount of room. The Cole Foundation that had published the national feature on her award nomination had invited her to a panel in the fall. She said yes this time. She added the Toronto conference back to her calendar. She called back the graduate student who had emailed 3 months ago, asking to interview her for a thesis on sustainable urban design in prairie climates. She started sleeping easily again. She stopped explaining her professional decisions to people who had not asked. She was 33 and she was, for the first time in longer than she could trace, not waiting for permission to be the full version of herself. One night in August, sitting with Owen on the deck of a friend's house outside of Cochrane, the sky doing that thing it did in Alberta, where it went 3 different colors before it went dark, he reached over and put his hand over hers without commentary. Not a statement. Not a negotiation. Just a hand. She turned hers over and held it. Somewhere in a different part of the city, she knew, there was a half-rinsed glass and a folded note, and a man who had decided she was predictable. She did not think about him often. When she did, the thought arrived and passed the way weather does. Real while it was present, gone when it moved on. What remained was this: a deck, a sky, a man who paid attention, work that mattered, and her own name said in rooms she had earned. That was not a consolation. That was the whole thing.